A matter of life and death. That's the warning to millions of Americans in the path of Hurricane Milton, with just hours until it makes landfall in Florida. Tornadoes have already been spotted in the state as the force of the extremely dangerous Category 4 storm begins to be felt.
It's approaching Tampa Bay with winds of almost 250 kilometres per hour. US President Joe Biden has called Hurricane Milton the storm of the century. Our North America correspondent, Carrington Clark, joins us now from Washington. Carrington, just what's the latest?
Well, it appears that the edge of this monster storm has now reached the west coast of Florida. As you have introduced, there have been tornadoes spotted in other parts of southern Florida as a result of Hurricane Milton. It is moving towards this heavily populated area near Tampa. It is still unclear exactly what path it will take. Hurricanes have these things called wobbles, and it is possible that it will wobble off course, which would be good news if it was further away from these densely populated areas. But at this point, it does look on track to be one of the most catastrophic storms in American history. A storm of this magnitude has not hit the Tampa region in about 100 years, but when that storm hit, it was a far less densely populated area. So there is a lot more property in the way of this particular storm, and obviously a lot of people. Most have heeded the advice to evacuate. Millions of people were in areas with evacuation advice, and that also caused this clogging of highways out of these parts of central and southwest Florida as people tried to escape from this potential path. But this is a terrifying scenario for anyone who has decided to stay and hunker down, and also for those people who've obviously had to leave their property behind. Now, leading the efforts as far as the government response is concerned is the Florida Governor, Ron DeSantis. And although he says that the state has done all it could to prepare for this hurricane, he knows that there is likely to be devastating impacts.
Hurricane Milton is still a major, very strong hurricane. It's currently a Category 4 hurricane with maximum sustained winds of 155 miles per hour. That is just a whisker shy of a Category 5. And while there is the hope that it will weaken more before landfall, there is high confidence that this hurricane is going to pack a major, major punch and do an awful lot of damage.
Just a terrifying situation for people there, and this all happens just weeks after Hurricane Helene devastated parts of the US.
Yeah, it's not uncommon for there to be hurricanes that follow other hurricanes, but to have two of the size and magnitude of Helene and now Milton hitting America in such quick succession is really stretching government agencies who are there to try to help. There is still major cleanup from the results of Hurricane Helene, particularly further up north. But in Florida, this is a particular issue because of Hurricane Milton, because so much of the debris that was left from Hurricane Helene is still littering the streets. It's there waiting to be collected. And although now different agencies in Florida are trying to get as much of that debris cleared away, put into places that are more secure, because they know that there is a high risk that that debris will in itself become dangerous projectiles as that wind whips up that debris across this area. But perhaps the most dangerous part of this whole equation will be the storm surge. They are estimating that we could see storm surges of up to 4.5 metres around the Tampa Bay region. Now, that is particularly dangerous because of the topography of Florida. It's a relatively flat state, and so that is going to hit a lot of property in that area. And obviously, if anyone has decided to hunker down and they are at low-lying areas, as one authority figure tried to phrase it that if you are on the bottom floor, it could become your own coffin. I mean, they're using very loaded language. I've never seen this type of language used around a storm in America. People are being very blunt that this is a life and death situation, and that if you can evacuate, you need to. Already, some people are being told that if they haven't already evacuated, they now need to just shelter in place.
Some really strong warnings there, Carrington, and let's just hope that this, as you say, wobbles off course and away from some of those really heavily populated areas.
The Victorian government has agreed to what's believed to be a record settlement to a survivor of child sexual abuse at a primary school in Melbourne South East. Reporter Nicholas Hines joins us now from Melbourne. Nick, good morning. What can you tell us about this case?
Well, Michael, this $8 million settlement from the Victorian Education Department comes just a week before this case was due to be heard before the Supreme Court. And it relates to abuse suffered by a former student at the Beaumaris Primary School in the 60s and 70s, a really terrible time at that school when a whole generation of students suffered abuse from a number of pedophile teachers at the school. This particular case relating to perhaps one of the most notorious of those, Darryl Ray, who was a librarian and sports coach at the school in that time. Ray died last year while awaiting trial on fresh charges over other abuse he allegedly inflicted. He'd already been convicted of 33 offences committed against 21 different boys over a number of decades. Of course, that's just one small example in what has been a huge saga, this ongoing fallout from the Education Department's mishandling of these pedophile teachers. We saw a public inquiry earlier this year finding appalling and systemic failures within the department where reputation of the department was prioritised over the well-being of students. Lawyers for the man involved in this case say he's been on this path for decades, trying to get justice for the students abused and trying to get proper compensation. He's encouraging other victims to come forward and to seek what they deserve. There is an ongoing truth-telling process here in Victoria now for any of the victims of abuse at state schools to come forward, and that's due to continue through till 2026.
OK, Nick, thanks for the update.
Well, let's look at some other stories making news, and the Prime Minister will meet China's Premier Li Qiang on the sidelines of the ASEAN Summit in Laos this morning. Anthony Albanese says the pair will have what he called direct discussions. Key issues expected to be raised are trade blockages on Australian lobster exports and China's recent test of an intercontinental ballistic missile over the Pacific.
2 men involved in a pro-Palestine protest at Western Sydney University have been charged. The men, aged 20 and 23, allegedly assaulted security guards as about 30 demonstrators converged on the university yesterday morning. They've been charged with assault offences and resisting arrest. 2 officers were injured but did not require treatment.
A survivor of child sexual abuse at a Melbourne school is set to receive what is believed to be the biggest known payout to an abuse survivor in Australia. The $8 million settlement comes a week before the claim was due to reach the Supreme Court. The man was among a generation of students who suffered abuse at the hands of prolific abuser Darryl Ray at Beaumaris Primary in Melbourne South East in the 60s and 70s. Darryl Ray died last year while facing dozens of new charges.
Residents in southeast Queensland are assessing the damage this morning after severe storms. Rainfall totals of more than 100 millimetres were recorded in pockets of the southern Gold Coast and hinterland areas late yesterday. The Gold Coast City Council has opened an emergency coordination centre to help those in the area.